Hey everyone, we are starting a brand new series. This time it is Intune Suite Masterclass. In the first episode, we have a special guest, Pratima. She's going to help us understand EPM.
Thank you so much, Sushant. First of all, thank you for inviting me. For everyone who doesn't know me, I'm Pratima Singh. I'm a part of the same team as Sushant is in Microsoft, working in Microsoft for quite some time. This is my 15th year, worked in different domains, different countries. For everyone, EPM, Endpoint Privilege Management, is what we are going to talk about today. So it is a part of 6 to 7 products that we have under Intune Suite, and it's more aligned to meeting those zero trust methodology that the customers are looking at. So today's conversation would be more about what this capability is, why did we introduce this to our customers, because it's a new suite of technology products that we have under Intune Suite. What are the benefits, what are we approaching or providing there with this feature to our customers? And I think it would not be a too much of a slight kind of a discussion, because the whole sense of these technology or Intune related feature makes sense when we show it on how it actually works in real time scenarios. So we'll jump into our Intune portal where everything is one single plane of console and see how things are done at ease. When we say it is easy, simple, we'll show it today to you how exactly and how easy that is. We'll get started first thing with talking about why. So we bring technologies, we bring features into our technology stack with ask or what we research and see with organization requiring at. So with Intune Suite, specifically with EPM, what we saw, there was a binary choice that IT admins or SecOps had when trying to reach to that zero trust principle. So the first one was to make all employees in the organization as local admins. They have the ease to do whatever they want on their laptops. Productivity is high. People are happy with doing that, which obviously lead to a very vulnerable state from threat vectors and from the security standpoint. The second one was a more restrictive kind of an approach, wherein to meet to those zero trust principle of least privilege and just in time access, we saw IT admin restricting users to be a standard users on their devices and laptops, which led to other challenges, which is productivity on those laptops, on those devices by the users decreasing, because for everything that they need to do, they had to call IP help desk, and obviously that related to multiple support tickets. So there has to be a balance when we talk about security and productivity, and that's what we are trying to achieve with endpoint privilege management. And in this discussion, I'll call that as EPM wherever I'm trying to mention that. So, to achieve that balance that I just discussed between security and productivity, we saw organization trying to invest in toolings and in multiple vendor solutions to work and make sure the users are standard users, and then they try to do a just in time access when they want to install, run diagnostics or anything on those desktops or devices. But the challenge was these were not integrated with Intune, which was their primary model of management of devices. This had a different console. So there was vendor complexity, there was commercial issue, there was integration, and there was other aspect that started coming into factor. So Microsoft, with the whole idea of Intune Suite to simplify the management and security estate of organization, introduced endpoint privilege management, which is a generally available solution right now, wherein you can allow your employees and users to be standard users on these desktops or on these devices, and IT admins or security operations team can define policies on how applications would elevate on those devices when need be. So you can create a most restrictive elevation behavior, or you can create a generic elevation behavior of those application, but the users on those devices would always be standard users. So what that supposed is an enforcement of privilege access, of least privileged access, and we aligning to those zero trust principle that I was talking about. Now, Let's go a bit deeper into what endpoint privilege management is. Now, endpoint privilege management has two fundamental elements to understand, and the way it works would be very clear when we understand these two simple elements that EPM works on top of. One is a detection, which is how you're creating your policies. Those IT admins are creating their policies to detect an application or a binary on those devices. So you have multiple ways to detect an application, which I'll talk about in the next slide. So you define those attributes of that application or binary, or you define those parameters so that the EPM service can detect that. And once the EPM service detect, okay, this is the application or binary, depending on the parameters that you have defined, you create a corresponding elevation action. So imagine you create an application, you provide parameters of that application, EPM triggers that particular detection. Now, what is the action that you need to take because the detection has happened? That is the elevation action. And that elevation action could be anything. It could be elevating the privilege with some kind of giving justification or going through an help desk user who approves that. And that's where this slide talks about that. So those two important elements that I just mentioned, one is detecting the application or the file or the binary. So you could create multiple parameters or define multiple parameters. It is mostly recommended that you add as much as parameters that you could actually. So imagine if I am adding a file, which is Microsoft Edge, that I want to detect by EPM service, just by adding the file name and then allowing it to elevate might not be the good solution here, because users could rename the file and it could create a wrong kind of elevation behavior against those files. So it is suggested that you add multiple parameters. So in this case, you could have file name, the path of that file, the certificate on that file, right? So you could add the certificate of the file, and the most preferred method is to add the file hash. And I will show you how you can gather those information with the EPM tools that we have. But these are all the parameters that you see that you could add to detect the file. And once you have detected the file, you provide the elevation behavior. So how would the application elevate, because the user is a standard user? So we have three elevation behavior right now: user confirmed, automatic, and support approved. So let's just try to understand these three elevation behavior a bit in detail, and then obviously in the demo, you would see more. So the first one is automatic. So this one is an auto approve. So it's just like a UAC prompt with the user being admin on that particular device. So you right click, you run with Elevate, and there is a transparent experience. There is nothing happening, and the application is elevated, and you could install that particular application. The second one is user confirm. This is the most recommended method if you're really not looking at creating a help desk support method to approve application. So we suggest that you use user confirm in majority of your application. So user confirmed requires some kind of validation to be given when the user is trying to elevate an application. So we have two methods of validation right now. One is business justification, wherein the user puts a business justification that you're seeing on the screen and clicks on continue, and the application is auto elevated. The second validation method is the Windows authentication, which means a prompt would come up wherein the user has to re authenticate with their username and password, and then the application would elevate. So, always justified by and validation for user confirmed.
Hey
The
Pratima, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So the business justification, where is the data shown? Like, is it an Intune portal, or can
Yes.
we create a workflow to the manager via Teams app or an email or things like that?
Yes. So yes, for both of them. So I was about to show you. So there is a great deal of reporting that EPM has, or for that matter, all the Intune Suite features that you see, they have a great deal of reporting. So any elevation that you do, whether it is user confirmed, automatic, or support approved, that I'll talk about a little later, they get audited. So you see reports in the EPM console, wherein you would first see, you could filter those reports via applications or elevation method, and it will tell you what kind of elevation method you chose. So in case if there was an application that was elevated with user confirm, it will tell you, okay, this was the user confirm, this was the application, and this was the business justification given. So you could have that audit trail with the same number of days that you could audit, like you have for Intune. Now there is an integration of ServiceNow, so you could integrate that with ServiceNow, and Teams has that integration as well, so you could do that. But on that topic, Shashan, we just got the support approved. I think it was last month when we got support approved method also allowed or generally available for endpoint privilege management. Now, when you choose support approved, what we are doing is we are trying to create that workflow wherein on the endpoint device you right click on your application, it checks for a rule, it says, okay, there is a rule for this application, so we detected. Now we want to find the condition on what is the elevation behavior. There is this particular policy that is sent to Intune, wherein an Intune admin who has permission to see the request and approve the request, so there is an RBAC control on top of that. The Intune admin with those permission would review that request. So he could see the details of that request. What was the application? Where is it coming from? Who is elevating it? What is the business justification that you have put? And that particular IT admin can approve that request. In case that he is approving it, the Intune policy would send that particular message or notification to the device which sent that particular request, and the user would have 24 hours from the time the request was approved to elevate that application or work on that application. Or the support or the IT admin could deny that request. In that case, he has to manually notify that particular EPM user that your request is denied and what is the reason that request was denied. So we just got support approved, enabled. It was a huge ask that we had for our customers, and all this information gets audited in your endpoint privilege management portal. So you see all those information on what's happening with your application, how many elevations are happening, and you could categorize them by managed elevation, which are under control of EPM, or non-managed elevation, which are not EPM specific elevation. It could be run as administrator or user are running it in admin context. I hope I answered your question,
Yep.
Shant.
Yes, it is very clear. Thank you.
Before we jump on a little bit deep into the architecture of endpoint privilege management, let's just understand what are these policies. I think the start of this conversation I spoke about, these are policy driven elevation behavior. So there are two kinds of policies that endpoint privilege management works on. The first one is endpoint privilege management EPM settings policy, which is basically defining or enabling EPM for your devices. So this policy is required if you're starting with adopting EPM. So this first enables EPM in your environment. So when we say enable, there are some client side component that gets installed on your devices, which would basically look, or which is basically the EPM service would look to check the rule, check the detection and elevation behavior logs, capturing all those information, and then you could create a default behavior for EPM for your entire organization. So imagine if you say there are 10 application in my organization which I want to have certain kind of elevation behavior, but for rest 110 or 1000 application that I want to have a default behavior. So under EPM settings policy, you can create that default behavior, which could be user confirmed, support approved, and automatic that I discussed previously. There are other aspects that you define in settings policy. I'll show you when I'm on the portal. The second one is rules policy. So this is a rule that would you would create to add the detection rule for your application. and the elevation behavior for that application. So a rule is basically linked to an application. So you create the parameters on how you want to detect that particular application and corresponding elevation behavior or action that you would want to create. So you would have multiple rules depending on how many application you want, and then you can assign this to your users or devices on how exactly you're trying to assign those policies. So let's just talk about the architecture. So when we'll go onto the portal and show you how endpoint privilege management policy creation looks like, you would see it's very simple. It is within the clicks of few buttons, provided you have your application information and how you want your application elevation behavior to look like. But I thought it would be really good to give this information to everyone on what are we doing in the back end. So at a very high level, how the architecture is, what are the components involved. So as mentioned, when you create an EPM settings policy, there is a small set of components that would get provisioned on your devices on which you are enabling the EPM policy, right? So we will talk about, there is a small snapshot of what all those components are on that particular endpoint devices. But there are multiple subcomponents that are required for the EPM service to work the way it is supposed to work. So the first one is the shell extension, which is what is required for us to basically trigger the auto elevation or the elevation in EPM. So when you have EPM enabled for your devices and these components are installed and you right click on any of your application, you would say run with elevation, which is what would mean when you click that it would check for a rule against that application. If there is a rule detected, it will look for what is the elevation behavior and work against those elevation behavior. So that's this shell extension that we do. There is a EPM filter driver which will monitor for executables that are required for elevation to happen. There is an EPM client which will call into the EPM service on behalf of the user, and everything is done via the EPM service. So when the user does a right click run with elevation, EPM service will proxy that particular binary or application and elevate its credential as administrator and install or run diagnostic or whatever you're trying to do on that particular application and have full admin rights just for that application and not on that particular device. Now, with that information in mind, it is the EPM service on that particular device that is doing everything. It is looking at the elevation flow when you do right click run with elevation. It is looking for any notification about a policy arriving. So imagine if you're creating new rules, it will look for that. It will receive messages and it will orchestrate any kind of telemetry that you need to do. So at a very high level, this is the flow. What happens when EPM is enabled? There is a settings policy, there is a rules policy that you create. The first one is you run in the context for your EPM. So you say right click run with elevation. That is doing a trigger to check whether there is a rule that is defined or whether there is a settings that has a default behavior. So we will check that. If there is a rule, it would look at, okay, are we meeting all the criterias for that particular rule? If yes, what is the behavior? And we work on that behavior and we continue. If there is no specific rule, then we fall back to the default behavior that is being defined in the elevation settings policy. If we find a matching rule, we continue, whether it is automatic or support approved or user confirmed, and we complete that information. And in the backend, if we are sending diagnostic usage data or information to Intune, we get that information also audited and logged in your Intune console. That's the entire flow of how EPM would look like. And I think with all these technical information now being provided, I think it's a good time for us to quickly go and have a quick demo on how things look like. Let's just look at two sides of endpoint privilege management. One is what the IT admin or the SecOps team would do to create policies. What are those policies? And I've emphasized on the fact these are simple. So let's see how simple those are. And second is on the end user experience. Once those EPM components are installed, and how would that detection and the elevation behavior look like? So the whole idea of Intune Suite was to integrate these capability right into your Intune portal, so you're not going between multiple portals and trying to do that integration. So same hold good for endpoint privilege management also. So here I am on my Intune portal. I go under endpoint security, wherein all my security related features for Intunes would be showing, and endpoint privilege management is here. So obviously that means I have licensed my users who would be using EPM. So it's a per user license model. So you need to license every user that would have a rule or that would have a settings that would go on to those devices. So
Pratima, can I ask one more question for clarification for anybody who's listening? Can we get EPM license as a standalone add-on, or do we have to get Intune Suite to get this feature?
So both. So EPM work comes as a standalone offering also. So if you're looking at the Intune Suite solution and you think only EPM as of now for your organization is making sense, for sure Intune Suite, endpoint privilege management can be bought as standalone for the user who would be leveraging this offering.
Okay, thank you.
So here I am on endpoint privilege management. So we'll be recapping all that we discussed during the slide deck presentation that we were showing. So when I said there are uh, platforms on which EPM could be applied. So on that, so let's just go ahead and look at the prereqs on where all EPM works. So obviously, licensing it is available as standalone or as a part of Intune Suite. Requirement: the devices needs to be Entra joined or they can be Entra hybrid joined. They could be co-managed or they could be Intune managed. If they are co-management, there is no requirement for any kind of workload to be on Intune. So that's not a requirement. It's just that the state of management has to be co-managed. Second, it is supported on all these operating system that you see here, and there are some URLs and line of sight endpoints or network points that needs to be available. We have listed that. Around virtualization, we do support endpoint privilege management on Windows 365, and my demo is on Windows 365 virtualized device today. So with having the understanding of prereqs, I select my platform and I select the profile. So these are the two policies that whole EPM works around. As I said, the first one is the elevation setting policy that we create for enabling EPM for your organization. So let's just say enable EPM. So here is what EPM settings policy is. By default, it is set to enable, which means EPM would be enabled on the devices that you're targeting this setting to. Then you have the default elevation response. So that is, if there is no rule that is created for a specific application or binary, it will fall back to this default elevation response. So imagine in most cases we say by default it is deny all requests. So if you're not configuring anything here, it will go to deny all requests. Or you could use any kind of elevation behavior here. So I'll set it to not configure. That means it is going to deny all request. The next one is send data for reporting. So when you enable this to yes, it will send diagnostic and usage data to Intune, the devices on which the EPM is enabled and which would be used to provide those audit reports. When you click on yes on the data reporting, it will provide you the scope of those reporting. like what kind of data that you want to send to Intune from those EPM managed devices. Do you want to just send diagnostic data, which will basically provide you health of those client components that I mentioned, which are provisioned on those devices when EPM is enabled? So it is just going to provide you the health reports, or you want to send the diagnostic data that will capture the health of those devices, the EPM client components, and it would also provide you reports or data around what kind of elevation happened. So, not specific to EPM, if there is any elevation happening on those devices. So, we call them managed elevation, which is EPM specific elevation. If there was a rule or a setting because of which elevation happens, it is categorized as managed elevation. And unmanaged elevation, if you just do a run as administrator or you install an application in an admin context, that becomes non managed elevation. So if you choose diagnostic data and all endpoint elevation, it would capture the or provide you diagnostic data for the client components of EPM, how is the health and everything, and also the information of elevation, irrespective whether they are managed or unmanaged. And the last one is diagnostic data and managed elevation only. So, diagnostic data providing you the health of those client components, and only managed elevation data, which is specific to EPM. So I've already created this, so I'm not going to create it again. So here is mine. So this is the summary of the EPM that I have created. So this is the name, obviously Windows 10 and later. You could target it to your devices. We support filters. So if you want to create filters, you want to include or exclude some filter, that's already available. And then you can have your configuration, which I just informed. So in my case, and I'm enabling EPM, which means there would be client components that would get installed on all those devices that are included in the scope. My default elevation response is deny all. So if there is no rule against any of my application, then it would deny any elevation for any other rule or any other binary or an application. I am sending elevation data for reporting, and it is for all elevation and diagnostic data. So that's my EPM settings policy. Now,
And
once I
Pratima,
have,
we don't need
yep,
any other agent to be installed, right? Intune
no,
client agent is enough to deploy the components required for
that's
this.
right. And that's the whole reason when I went on to the prereqs and I spoke about
Yeah.
the prereqs. We say the device should be Intune unrolled or co-managed. If
Hmm.
that is there, it is the job of Intune or co-management to put those EPM client components, which are responsible for the EPM service or EPM filter driver, to check for rules and understand those detection workflow. So there
Okay.
is no need for us to create any agent or deploy any agent.
Correct.
So I'm done with creating my settings policy. I have enabled EPM. I have created the default behavior of elevation. Now let's just create rules for my application. So again, platform support is same. I'm creating an elevation rules policy. So here is where I would create a rule which is specific to an application or a binary. So right now the application that we are support.exe, but very soon we would have the support for MSIs and PowerShell extensions as well. So you can have any of these application and binary work with EPM. So imagine I'm saying I'm doing office.
Pratima, can I ask a question?
Sure.
When we start supporting these binaries with PowerShell, we will be able to change environment variable of the Windows as well, right? Like the settings, things like that. Not installing application. Like let's assume I want to change a system-wide change. Like
So what we are trying to get is the one that I mentioned right now, Sushant, is .ps1 support for an file filtered extension. So right now, if I see the Office Pro Plus that I'm creating here, has a .exe. So the immediate roadmap that I'm talking about is to include application with .msis extension or .ps1 as extension. What you are talking about is change of system properties, like
Correct.
you could yeah, you could have elevation to change time, or you could
Mm.
have elevation to change something in the control panel. That is in the roadmap. That's not the immediate one that I just mentioned,
Okay.
but we are working on system property change as well with EPM. It is very well in the roadmap to come as well for EPM.
Okay. Thank you for the
Yeah.
clarification.
So I add Office Pro Plus. I go next. Here is where I create those two elements that I started my conversation with. One is the detection. How do I detect when user click on an application? It is the Office Pro Plus application that the user needs to have the elevation. So I create a rule. Let me make it Office Pro Plus. If I want to create a description, what kind of elevation am I looking at, right? So Office Pro Plus, I know my users would need to deploy it, so I'm okay with user confirmed, but I need a justification to make sure how they are and which user and what justification. So these are the two justification that I have. Business justification, they typing something gets audited. Another one is Windows authentication, which provides an authentication prompt for them to put username and password. So I select that. Then is child process behavior. Now, what this is, sometimes there are child processes that are invoked by an application when it is elevated, right, or when it is installed. Now, here you could choose how those child processes elevation behavior would look like. So if you click on non-configured, it would go with the parent elevation behavior. So what you have set for your parent application type, it would use the same elevation behavior and it will go through. If you say, I want to require a rule to elevate, then you have to create a rule specific to all those child processes in EPM, and then deny all is look at whatever you have created for the parent, and it would elevate as per the parent type. Now when you're choosing child processes behavior, we highly recommend that you check with the application vendor, because when changing the child process behavior against what the parent application behavior is, sometimes we see applications having some issues. So it's always recommended, if you're looking at changing the child process behavior, work with the vendor to make sure it wouldn't have any impact with the way you're trying to elevate the application. So in my case, I'm not configuring it. That means obviously default, it will go with what you're defining for the parent app. Now here is where we defined the detection. How do I detect this is the application? So as I shared earlier, there are different parameters and properties that you could add. Now, when, as I said, EPM comes with its own tools also. So it comes with the tool which could provide you PowerShell modules, which with which you can run file attribute information. So here, I think I had run that, so I thought of sharing with the wider team. So if you see here, EPM on my machine, I have EPM. So with this EPM agent, I get EPM tools. With that, I have a PowerShell module which I have imported, and now whichever application that I want to include in my rule, I can get the attribute information of that application, and it makes my life much easy to get that information and populate that when I'm trying to create a rule. So I did that for one of the application for which I have created the rule already. So it is providing me this file hash, it is providing me the version, the description, the name, so I could just use that and put it. My
Mm.
job becomes very simple. So these are the tools available, so we are providing you with the means to capture these detection properties as well. Now one thing that you have is you could use the signature source, which is the certificate of that particular application. So imagine if I am looking at, I think I had one of my application here, which was Microsoft Edge. So one way is for me, whenever I'm trying to go, I go on this particular file, I look at this digital signature, I look at that certificate, I install that certificate in my private store, then import it, go back on that particular rule and add that. Or again, trying to make your job easy, what we can do is we can create. So if I just go back here, we could leverage reusable settings. So imagine if you're trying to upload certificate of application, instead of doing that every time, importing it, exporting it, trying to do that, I could create a reusable setting which would have that certificate already imported. So I already have this certificate in this policy. So let me just show that. So here I have already uploaded that from that Edge file MSI that I had, or exe that I had. I have uploaded that. And now when I'm trying to create the EPM rule, so in this case, I go back to my rule, I say create new. So as I said, it could be Office Pro Plus. Next, I don't want to go with the hassle of doing that again, getting the certificate store. So Pro Plus, trying to be short, user confirmed, business justification. I don't want to do. And then I go back here. I say use the certificate file in the reusable setting. I go here, add, I have that particular certificate here. So I can just use that from a reusable setting instead of importing it again from the store. So it makes in when we are looking at creating rule in organization with multiple application, and so it makes a lot of sense to use reusable settings. In my demo, I just had 3 applications, so it might look easy, but I'm seeing organization where they're creating those rules, so it makes their job very easy to just pull that from the reusable settings. So I have done that. I could add this certificate hash. So I have this information handy. Again, click a few buttons. I got everything. I add that, and I have created my EPM rule policy as well. So I have created in a EPM enablement, which is the setting to enable default behavior sending diagnostic information. And then I have created EPM rule policy, which is specific to an application and to a binary, and that has a detection depending on the parameters or attributes of that file, and then that has a behavior against that, whether it is user confirmed or whether it is support approved or whether it is auto approved. All that is being done. Now, this is from the IT admin side. It is very simple. You need to have the information of your application, how you want to have the behavior experienced by the user on your end user devices. You create those policy and you're good to go. Now, let's just switch back and see how this experience looks like on the endpoint. Now, the first thing is, let me just pull up my endpoint, just load that for you. So I'm just trying to launch my Windows 365 device, which where EPM would work, and it is in the scope of that particular policy. So I'll just move things here so that it is easy. The first thing I want to show is this was under the scope of EPM policy. So as I said, there are client components that gets installed, and these are all the client components. Now, for any policy that you create, it would create the rules and the settings. So you could see, imagine if you're creating 10 policy or 11 policy that are targeted to this particular user who's logged into this device or to this device, you would see all of them. So yesterday I had just one, I created one more. So if I just go over here, it will actually give me information of that policy. So what is that policy name? So if you see, this is the application name, and it will provide you that. So one way to troubleshoot if there are issues, you could say, is the rule even coming onto that particular device? And I see the rule is coming, so we are good to go. So just thought of sharing you where all these particular client components gets installed. So I talked about shell extension, I talked about the driver, talked about the EPM client. So that's the client side of thing. Now let's have a quick look at the default behavior. So I have created EPM rule for, I think it was Office and for my smart PSS. And I said, except for all other application, I want to deny. So Microsoft Edge is one of those. So I go here. Since EPM is on my device, I get run with elevated access. This is an app rule, or this is a binary or an application that's not under any of the rules. So I run with elevated. It is saying I cannot run it because I have done a deny all for any other app. So that's the way it would behave and service to for your default behavior response that I talked about. Now just look at what it would look like for an application that's under the scope. So let me just try to move things around.
And this is applicable for users who download these binaries from internet as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a different thing, and I'll talk about. So EPM is just to provide you how the application would behave on when you're trying to install it or run it. Right now, then you have WDAC, and then you have other controls on what can be downloaded or what can be installed on your application, what is whitelisted. So there are different levels. So EPM is just on the behavior of an application when you're running on the device. What can be run on the device, what is allowed and what is not allowed is WDAC, app control, and all those aspects. So I see customers getting confused. Okay, we have app control, we have labs. Labs is basically making the rotating your local admin password and all those aspects. EPM is just to make sure that no one is local admin on your devices, and when you have application on your devices, what would be the behavior when they're trying to install it. Is irrespective of downloading it, it's just when you're running it, what is the behavior that they would experience. So this is another application which is under the scope of a rule. So I right click, obviously this application, run with elevated access. Here is where I had said that it was user confirmed. I need to put a business justification. I put a business justification and I click on continue, and the application runs because it was user confirmed with business justification. If it was support approved, similar thing, I could have a business justification. It would have created a policy report in my Intune console. Someone would have approved it, and after approval, 24 hours is available for the user to install that application and run with that, just that application. So this, when EPM elevates a application against a behavior that you're doing, it's basically proxying that particular application, creating an admin context, letting it elevate and run with admin control. It is not elevating anything on the desktop. So if I go and try to do anything else with the standard user which requires local admin, I'll still not be able to do it. It is just localized to that application. Now, one more thing that I wanted to share was, let me just, the reports. So we spoke about, and I think Sushant, you also asked me, like what all level of auditing and reporting that is available. So here is my endpoint privilege management. I've switched to a different portal because my portal was having some issues. So I go on to reports, and there are a whole lot of reports. One is elevation report, which is elevation report against your organization. Like, it is not specific to EPM. Even if a user on a machine is doing run as admin, it will create that report. So it is a good way when you're starting your journey of adopting EPM, you could use that particular report just to see, okay, how many applications are running in admin context, which devices are they running, which user is running those, so that then you can create those policy. So here is my elevation report, and you would see these are unmanaged. That means they are not in the scope of EPM. So there is no rule against these application, or there is no setting against those application. These are unmanaged. Who is the user, which desktop, what is the application, information about that application. Now I go back, these are managed elevation. These are under the scope of a rule that you created in EPM. And again, similar kind of information. So if I go deeper into that, this is it. So as I said, it will provide you information about the detection of that app, and then it'll about what are the parameters that were detected. So I go next. You could filter that as per application. This gives you an understanding of, okay, how many applications in your organizations are getting elevated, and you see it is unmanaged, and there are 198 of msh that were getting elevated. So it's more of a reporting on how is the elevation posture of application in your organization. I think the last one that we have is by publisher. So this would talk again about who was the publisher, what was the elevation type, managed, unmanaged, or in my case, it is a user confirmed, which is that means there was a rule specifically that was created. So that was it. But I wanted to discuss some more things before we conclude this conversation. Is we spoke about the demo, we spoke a bit about troubleshooting, but I think going back to protecting your endpoints, that is the whole idea. And EPM is one of those offerings which is provided to organization to protect their endpoints aligned to zero trust principle. Now here in this diagram, what you're seeing is the core posture of the device is to have a non-admin user. So there should be standard user. With labs, you could have a local admin, but we are randomizing and we are rotating those local admins. So that's what labs is doing.
Can
EPM
you
is,
can you
yeah.
please elaborate bit more on labs? So if anybody is understanding, trying to understand what is labs, can you give
Yeah.
me a few more in-depth details on what it is, why it is used, and things like that?
So labs, as the name suggests here, Sushant, it is local admin password solution. It's a solution that we have. The first thing is we do not want the local admin password to be something that someone in your organization or the user is trying to reset. It is simple or something like that. So it's a tool. So right now it's cloud managed. We had on premises as well, which enables randomizing these password and rotating them at frequent interval. So it is offering that we are providing you, first thing, we are making sure these password are randomized, so they are difficult to be predicted if there is any kind of threat or any kind of password hash attack that's happening. And second, we are trying to rotate it, so it's not the same randomized password. We are trying to rotate it, so it is a tool and technology that does that for you. So that's one way of preventing local admin, because if there is a local admin whose password is being compromised, then there will be a lateral movement, and we see within couple of days we can have even attacks to the domain controller, and then you know what happens. So
Yeah.
that's what lapses.
Is
But
it an Azure service?
yes, it right now it is. Earlier we had it on premises, so right now we could do that as a managed service as well. So
Do we
if
need a special license for that, or P1 or P2, or can we get with Entra ID regular one?
I might need to check. I think it is
Okay.
not for Entra. It is with Windows. So if you have Windows Enterprise, you would get Labs as well. Now, the whole idea that I wanted to provide on this slide, Sushant, was to provide you different tools, different capabilities that we
Hmm.
have on devices, and organization not to get confused on why and what EPM is doing different, right? So again, starting with Labs. Labs is a local admin password solution provided if you have local admins to randomize and rotate those password as a frequent basis. EPM on the other side is it is allowing no one to be a local admin. Users should be a standard users on their devices and providing your behavior on how the application would behave when they're trying to elevate it. So it's that solution. Now then you have WDAC, or we used to call app control, and other solution, which is creating policies on what can be allowed on a device and what is not allowed on a device. So with app control or with WDAC, you create an allowed list and you create a block list. Block list, you cannot have them on those devices. Allowed list, you can have them, and then you can have EPM on top of that to create your behavior of installation. And then your other aspects of security, which is defender and all those, which is making sure if there is anomaly, if there is some kind of a behavior, how do you detect it, how do you prevent it. So This slide was just to make sure that you have this ring information on what are the various controls that we have and where EPM sits. Now, the final one, before we just have a sneak peek on the various troubleshooting tools that we have, is EPM at a very high level, what is available. So, what all you see under key capabilities is available right now. So, around elevation behavior, we have all the three. You have auditing, you have behaviors on how child processes could be elevated or could behave when there is an elevation. You have tenant level enablement, or you could do you device level and rollout. So that's kind of control that you have. And the second thing is what is coming soon. So additional file types, I just mentioned it to you, Sushant. So very soon we would have MSI and .ps1. This is to your question, Sushant, support for
Yep.
system settings, right? So imagine there was a lot of ask on, okay, if I'm trying to change system setting, control panel, time zone, I need EPM for that. That is also something in the roadmap. And support for persistent single session as your virtual desktop VMs. That's also something that we will be bringing for EPM. So that's at a very high level what we offer right now with EPM and what's coming. But what if it is not working? That's something that most of the people don't talk about. But I gave you a quick look at what all are the client side components that get installed. So there are enough information that you would have. So the first thing is we start with the event log. So this is the event log that you could start with. But the most thing is EPM creates its own log. So you create support ticket. If you want to review, there are EPM logs that you could review. But these are everything that you would need. So first thing is look at your event viewer just to see if there are any event with MMPC or MDM. Jump on your EPM logs that are under the folder Microsoft EPM agent logs. In that log, you would have different, like, as I said, there are different client components that get involved. So there could be an issue with the rule is not coming, or the filter is not able to call EPM service. So all those logs would show up in that particular log file. So that's the most important place for any EPM related troubleshooting. I think that is it. That was me around endpoint privilege management. But any questions or anything, Sushant, that you might have, happy to answer that. Yep.
It was super clear. Thank you so much, Pratima. Do you want anybody to reach out to you? So, do you mind if I add your LinkedIn profile or something in the description?
Yeah, anything to do with EPM for sure. Yes, why not?
Okay.
Yeah.
Because if you don't want people to bother you, then don't worry. Otherwise, I'll just put your link in the. Otherwise, I'll put your LinkedIn profile in the description. So if anybody want to follow you, whatever you might
Yeah,
share,
yeah.
they
It's
can
okay.
reach out, or they
All
can
good.
simply share follow you.
Yep, that's sure. That was really interesting, Sushant, and I hope we did a good start for Intune Suite. There are many other components, so it is a
Yes.
good series that you have started. Would be beneficial for a lot of organizations who are moving in that journey of zero trust, trying to go away with multi-vendor management solutions. So yeah, kudos to you.
Thank you. And I might request you to come back again in the future for some other topics as well. I haven't prepared the whole lineup. I do have few other speakers lined up for Intune Suite, but Intune is such a vast topic. We could always add more topics into it.
Yep. Thank you so much.